What is the movie about?
That's a very direct question. To start with, the movie is called Anahí's Room, and just like a little bit of background about that name. Anahí is like a Guarani name, comes from South America, and it's sort of a name that I have been fascinated with like for the last 20 years or something, since I lived in Paraguay. And it's like a legend about this little girl who like goes through all this like torture and like killings and stuff like this from the Spanish people who are invading South America. And in the end, she gets killed, and they tie her like to a tree, and so she basically like dies by this tree. And then the next day, they start growing these like red flowers up like everywhere around her village and in that neighborhood, and it's called Flor de Saibo. It's like a really beautiful red flower, and and I just really like the story about this sort of like beauty in children, or in like people in general, that you sort of like, you know, that you can kill, but something else would always like, you know, something beautiful always stays intact, at least in my vision. And the film takes point of departure in an artist called Jessie Kleemann. She's a Greenlandic artist, and I met her in Greenland many years ago when I was in an artist residency there, and we lived together. And Jessie for me is also like sort of like a symbol of a person who has like been through a lot in her life, but has sort of like come out like on the other side, and has used you know, quite a hardcore past in a creative and in a way where it becomes about creating beauty in a way. So that's the point of departure, but more like in general, it's about this road that we all have to travel, sort of like to go from being a child to becoming an adult, and the different tests and struggles and trials that we go through life, and I wanted to show this through different through body language more than anything, and see if I could talk about these different human emotion with performance, dance and art, and less talking, because all of my previous films have like primarily been documentaries, so I was a bit tired of talking and wanted to do it in a more performance way.
Okay. What inspired you to make the movie, except from the Italian story?
I've wanted to make a film about this theme, or this like this sort of like quite existential struggle that I think a lot of children have, and that some children have more than others. I've wanted to do that like for the last 7 years or so, and then I was going a bit back and forth in terms of like which format. I was thinking about doing like a feature, or documentary, or you know, and then other projects came up and stuff. So it's sort of been like an idea that I've had in the back of my head like for many years. Yeah.
Okay. Now you're talking about the form. The film consists of different parts, and there's both like poetry and interview and performance. And why did you decide to combine these different elements?
Because I like documentaries, because they take a point of departure in reality, and like in the concrete world, and I like to take stories out of that, which is also why I think I often end up like one way or the other to actually like work with real people, with their actual stories, and then I sort of tell them in whichever way, and I like to just maybe to maybe work a little bit creatively with the way that these real stories are being told. So poetry and performance and other art forms like music and sound, etc. I find for me are very important in terms of like just communicating this reality a little bit like differently, and also because I think like aesthetics and to make things beautiful is very important in terms of like talking about reality, and I like to make things beautiful, both what you hear and what you see and etc. And maybe that's sometimes a bit lacking when you make, or in many documentaries, I think. So I think to make it more like an art piece is quite important for me.
Okay. The cast is very international. How did you choose people that's working on this production?
Well, it's Jessie. I know, like I said, from years back, from having worked in Greenland on an exhibition, and then then I live in Berlin and I have lived here for years, and like my crew, my social, the fair that I operate in is quite international, and Miki Shoji, the Japanese, one of the artists, was from Tokyo. I met 4 years ago. Actually, by coincidence, she needed to have someone she could speak English with. So we just started, hanging out on a totally different term, and then I started seeing her in her work doing performance art, and she was really amazing. So like since then, I was like I wanted to work with her whenever there would be a chance. And back like some years ago, she worked with Ronni, Ronni Maciel, the other performance artist who was from Brazil, and I loved how they looked together. And from the first time I saw him, I really thought whenever he gets available, I wanna, get my hands on him because he was so talented, I thought. And Nadine, I've also known for Nadine. It doesn't matter. I've known for 12 years as well. Actually, I used to do camera, and I shot like a performance film with her when I had just moved to Berlin, and I just like sort of got back in touch with her half year ago or something like that, and just sort of remembered like the way she looked and the way she had behaved when I shot her. She had this sort of like very dreamy way about her that I sort of felt would fit in with the other one. So I sort of like gradually got one person added, and then I was always aware of like that the next person had to fit the people who were already sort of in the team. So also like in terms of like how they look, I try to make the 5 of them fit together, and also with their energy. The last person, not to forget, is the little girl who's 9 years old, and it's Raven do Canto, and her I met through Nadine, and I just like when I met her, I just immediately thought she was the right girl because she had this like total universal appeal about her, and that was something I had been speaking to Jessie about, where Jessie had talked about herself as like a universal baby, and Raven really like just for me is very much that. So even though she hasn't done so much performance before, I thought that she really fitted into the crew, and I like that it's international because I think the film is about it's an universal thing, so it shouldn't be attached to a nationality. So I think that's why I choose it to be like that it's people from all over the world, so that because also especially like when you have to do with Greenland, you often get into like these sort of cliches about that all these problems that you have in Greenland, and abuse and alcohol and all this, and I really didn't want to do that because it's something. It's not about that, and it's more about like just growing up, and then some people have to fight more to grow up than others. So it was just to make it an international point, so to say.
The poems that are kind of an important part of the film are like very bleak, and so I was wondering, is that going to be the mood throughout the whole film, or how's that going to?
A good question. I hope it will be like more nuanced than that. I mean, I will see in the editing, I would like for sort of the poetry to be like sort of the beginning of the movie, maybe the, sort of the starting point, because that's sort of like the start of her life. In the case of this poetry, in the start of Jessie's life, it's about her childhood very much. And I would like sort of, then throughout the movie to go through different emotions so that you sort of leave the atmosphere of the poetries and travel through other emotions and hopefully end up in a totally different place. So I would like to sort of go from A to B in that sense, and also go from like this quite deep, quite dark sentiment to something a lot more like strong and positive.
What are you hoping to give the viewer from this experience?
I would like for everybody to be able to identify with it actually, because like I said, I think it is a universal sort of feeling, idea, struggle. So I hope that everybody will be able to identify with these different fights and feelings that everybody have to confront, or I at least think should confront, in order to sort of like be true to yourself, and in order to sort of go for what you want, go for something positive, go for a better life, and maybe also to not just like accept destiny or accept what has been given to you, but to really also sort of say, even though you've been given something, some cards that are not so positive or not so fortunate, as a starting point, that is still positive or still possible to change and to end up in a totally different situation. So I think it's a lot about like taking responsibility for your life, and to give people maybe like the incentive to change and to take charge.